Dave Sunday is a Republican candidate for Pennsylvania Attorney General. Why are you running for this office?
I'm running for this office because I feel that it is absolutely critical that we have someone as Attorney General that understands what it takes to make our community safer. I'm the elected district attorney in York County. I've been doing this for a long time, and I feel that we have certain challenges we're facing as a Commonwealth that I'm uniquely positioned to be able to address.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Attorney General's office. What is its role within Pennsylvania's criminal justice system?
So within the criminal justice system, the way it works is the Attorney General supplements, in a way, the work of the district attorneys. And so the Commonwealth's Attorneys Act lays out the specific duties of the Attorney General. And so what I can tell you is, for example, as the elected DA, when we have conflicts in our office, those cases will go to the Attorney General. With regard to certain multi-jurisdictional large-scale cases, that will go to the Attorney General. A lot of district attorneys make resource referrals to the Attorney General's office. And then the Attorney General's office does have some crimes that they have concurrent jurisdiction over that they can look at themselves. The Attorney General's office has a powerful position with regard to leadership in the criminal justice space, a loud voice with regard to policy. And there's a lot of work that the Attorney General's office does in collaboration with the district attorneys that impact directly our criminal justice system.
Now, if you were elected to be the Attorney General, what would your top priorities be?
Well, I can tell you right now, right off the bat, the opioid epidemic. And so that's something that I have been dealing with and working with in York County for a long, long time. The opioid epidemic is something that, as you know, started, well, it didn't start, but it really came to fruition in Pennsylvania about 10 years ago. And in York County in particular, opioid overdose deaths tripled in the course of 1 year. And so ever since then, we have been diligently fighting the epidemic in York County. And so my philosophy of criminal justice is accountability and redemption. You have to have both. You must hold people accountable. But on the other side of it, we have to embrace redemption, and we have to do work that encompasses prevention as well. And so to that point, the entire Commonwealth has been impacted by the opioid epidemic. In particular, when you look at not just how it's torn families apart, how it's impacted lives, how it's impacted the economy, at the same time, it's driving crime all throughout the Commonwealth. And so that is one of the number one issues facing our criminal justice system, and that's something that I'm going to absolutely focus on day one.
Now, as district attorney, you co-founded the York County Heroin Task Force, which later became the York County Opioid Collaborative.
Yes.
Talk about that and what your involvement was.
Absolutely. So we're very good as prosecutors at prosecuting people and putting them in prison, okay? And that's something that is very important in certain circumstances. At the same time, one of the things that we have to do, and we identified this about 10 years ago when we really took a deep dive into the epidemic, is do everything we can to decrease people becoming addicted in the first place and help people that are in the throes of addiction. Because if we can't do that, then we are never going to get ahead of this. And so we formed what was called the Heroin Task Force. And that was something that we put together with our county coroner, Pam Gay, and myself, some police chiefs, members of the medical community, physicians, people that were in long-term recovery. And we took a deep dive into the opioid epidemic to see what's out there that we can do to impact the demand side of it. And what happened over time was the Heroin Task Force morphed into a nonprofit called the York Opioid Collaborative. And it's a thriving nonprofit today with an executive director and a robust board made up of people all throughout the community. Like I said, people in long-term recovery, police chiefs, doctors, service treatment providers. And so to this day, that nonprofit is working to do everything they can to decrease barriers to treatment, to educate the community. We go into schools and we do education with children, and we work with anyone. The faith-based community is a really important part of what we do as well. And so the takeaway is we form this nonprofit to do everything we can on the demand side of it. But at the same time, as a prosecutor and as the elected DA, we do everything we can to attack the supply side as well. which often can be very challenging. And what we discovered is that the only way to truly make a difference is to attack both. And to really have, I was in the Navy, and so there are a lot of Navy terms come out. So this is an all hands on deck approach in every way humanly possible, with accountability, but also with empathy. Because, the amount of harm that has been caused by this is something that, that it'll take generations for us to really wrap our minds around it. And to the point of everything from families that have been torn apart, people that are becoming incarcerated, employment issues. I think about the children who have a tremendous amount of trauma as a result of growing up in homes where their parents may have had overdoses in front of them. And so this is something that, even though it's extremely difficult, it's something that as a society, we must attack. And so to your question, that's a global answer to what my role is and was in putting that nonprofit together.
Well, let's go back in time a little bit and talk about your background.
Sure.
Where did you grow up?
So I grew up right here in central Pennsylvania. I was born and raised primarily in Harrisburg. And then I moved to Cumberland County, where I went to high school. And after I graduated from East Pennsboro High School, I joined the Navy. And so I'm not going to say I needed all direction in life, but I was looking for something to kind of help me out. And so I went straight to the recruiter. I was a young man, I was 18, and I enlisted as an enlisted sailor. So I was an E1. There isn't any rank lower than an E1, so it was the bottom. And I did everything from, I swabbed decks and I chipped paint, I did it all. And I was on a guided missile frigate, and we were deployed all throughout the world. And so even though back then when I was going through it, it wasn't the most enjoyable 4 years, but it was such a blessing in my life. I'm so grateful I did it. We traveled the world. I was in the Persian Gulf for Desert Strike. I spent a lot of time in Central America and South America and in the Caribbean doing counter-drug operations, where we boarded drug runners' vessels and tried to stop the drugs from coming up here to the United States. And I promise you that back then, when I was 18 and 19 doing that, I would have never imagined that almost 30 years later, we'd be sitting here talking about this. And so I came home from the Navy after 4 years. And like a lot of returning veterans from deployment, I needed a job. And I didn't have my advanced education. I didn't even go to college yet at that point. And so like a lot of people, I looked in the phone book at the time, and I went in the yellow pages and I found UPS was hiring. And so I just went to UPS and I started working there. I did all 4 years of my undergrad during the day, and I worked at UPS at night. And then I worked at UPS during the day, and I went to law school at night. So I ended up working at UPS for almost 8 years.
When you were a kid, were you interested in politics?
No, I wasn't. When I was a kid, I was interested in sports. I was interested in reading. I loved reading. And I was excited to join the military. And so I really wanted to serve. And so that was what I thought about.
So why law school? What was it about law that drew you to it?
Well, to be frank, when I was working at UPS and I got my undergraduate degree in finance, I just tried to think of a way that I could just further my career. And when I think about the way that I came up through my professional life, being an enlisted guy in the Navy, working at UPS through undergrad, I really felt that it was important to me to show that it wasn't where you started, but it was where you finished. And so I tried to find ways to better myself personally and professionally. And I just refused to give up. And so I saw law school, and I thought it was an opportunity for me to try to do something that was difficult. And it turned out to be another one of the great decisions that I made in my life.
What was your first job as a lawyer?
So my first job as a lawyer was, right out of law school, I helped there was an attorney, and I was waiting because I was applying for clerkships to work for a job. So just as an aside, so I met my wife right at the end of law school. And she was in New York at the time. She was born in Sri Lanka. And so she's a naturalized citizen, and we have our son Bodie, who is in third grade. But so I ended up getting a job as a law clerk for a judge in York County. And prior to that, there was a time period where, because I was trying to find a way to learn more about the law before I started the clerkship, and I worked briefly for an attorney named Jane Alexander, who was a longtime attorney in Pennsylvania. But I started clerking for a judge in York County who was our president judge, Joe Adams. And then as soon as that clerkship was complete, I then started working immediately in the district attorney's office.
Well, you're a prosecutor and have been for a long time. What do you like about that part of law?
You know, I talk about this. So we have a robust DA's office that I work at. You know, we're directly north of Baltimore. People don't recognize that York County goes from about, a few minutes from where we are right here, from Harrisburg down to Baltimore County. And so as a result of that, we have tremendous challenges that we have to face. And, for a guy who has served in the military, on deployment, worked at UPS all those years, as a prosecutor, and next year will be my 17th year in York County. As a prosecutor, what I have discovered is one of the greatest professional gifts you could ever imagine is knowing that you're doing something that is truly helping others. And there are very few professions that are this challenging and difficult, but at the same time, every night you think back on your day and you know that you're doing something that's meaningful. Like you know that you're doing something that matters. And I think that is one of the greatest gifts professionally that you can ask for.
What do you like about being a trial lawyer?
Sure. I loved doing jury trials. I loved it. And what I enjoyed the most was working with the victims and working with the police and making sure that you did the right thing and you fought for someone. As a trial lawyer and as a prosecutor, you are fighting to achieve the just result. And that's one of the things that I think is so important about doing this job and something that I enjoy. As prosecutors, our role in the system, we're one of the only attorneys that exist that we don't have clients. And people kind of forget that. Our clients are essentially society. And so when we have a case from the very beginning, all the way through the jury trial, our goal is to ensure that justice is served and that we have the right outcome. And so to that point, as a prosecutor and now as the elected DA, I've had a tremendous opportunity to work in courtrooms and I've done tons of first degree murder trials, capital cases, elder abuse, fraud, financial fraud, everything under the sun. And now moving into my role that I have been in as the elected DA, I have an amazing opportunity to impact policy, which not only helps those single cases, but it also impacts policy as a whole and impacts the entire community.
Why did you decide to run for district attorney?
So what happened was I didn't always have the goal to run for district attorney. In fact, it wasn't even really something I thought about until our former district attorney was preparing to retire. And he said to me, "Dave, I think you would make a great DA. Is that something you would consider doing?" And I had to think really hard about it. And so, my wife and I, as a family, we got together and I decided that it was something I was willing to try. And at the time that I made that decision, we were also still in the throes of, my professional career, you have the whole trial lawyer side of it, but a just as important side of it has been the community fight with regard to the opioid epidemic, with regard to the mental health crisis, with regard to the work we do on reentry. And we have seen tremendous outcomes in our big county as a result of a lot of that work that was done. And I had a job that was not finished. And I was in the middle of doing it, and I felt like that was the place for me, and I just felt like it was the right thing to do.
Now, you mentioned elder abuse as an issue that you've worked with.
Absolutely.
And you've been on the elder abuse task force.
Yes,
Can you talk about that and what you do?
Sure, absolutely. So people tend to forget, I think Pennsylvania, don't quote me on this, has the second highest amount of senior citizens in the entire country. And in York County in particular, we have a really high number of senior citizens. And so when I was a younger prosecutor working through these cases, I used to see cases come into the office that were theft cases. I had one in particular that I dealt with that really brought my attention to how serious this was, where there was an elderly gentleman who was suffering from Alzheimer's, and he was ripped off by someone. And I was just so upset because I feel like that as a society, sort of, if we're graded as a society, one of the areas that should be looked at is how we treat and protect those amongst us that can't protect themselves. And I think of seniors, I think of children, and just seeing this guy get ripped off, it really bothered me. And so I took it to a jury trial. The defendant was convicted. And at that point, I recognized that, these cases are horrific after they happen. What can we do to prevent them? Because unfortunately, we live in a world where when a lot of the seniors are ripped off, that money's not coming back. It's going to some faraway land. And so the best thing we can do to protect them is to give them the tools so that they don't get ripped off in the first place. And so we started this elder abuse task force where we started working with our York County Agency Area on Aging. And we worked with others in the community that understood this, the senior centers. And I started going around to senior centers all throughout York County and did presentations on how to avoid getting ripped off. I've done scam jams with AARP. We've done radio presentations. I've done it, on TV. And it's a beautiful thing because it's just wonderful when people have the tools to help themselves. And especially in today's world with medicine the way it is, we have people that are living longer. And when people live longer, they're on pensions or they have pensions, they're on fixed income. They are unfortunately prime targets for scammers. I mean, we could probably do an entire other show on scammers. And especially with the internet, it's really scary. And so I feel so strongly that one of the most important ways to make our community safer is to prevent crime. I mean, if we prevent crime, because remember, when a file comes to a prosecutor, it's a lagging indicator of societal issues. And so when I start seeing all these elder abuse cases, then what that means is so many people have already been victimized. And if we look holistically at our community and want it to be safe, we have to do everything we can to prevent it, which is the goal, one of the goals of the Elder Abuse Task Force. The other goal of it, which is just as critical, is ensuring that we hold people accountable that are ripping off our senior citizens, not only through financial fraud, through power of attorney theft, but also through physical neglect when it's identified.
Can you talk about the significance of law enforcement-based mental health initiatives in the criminal justice system?
It's critical, so important. So to begin with, we talked about the opioid epidemic. Now let's look at the mental health crisis. When you look at our community, so this is a multifaceted issue. And part of it is, we have a crisis of public servants in this country and in Pennsylvania. And that includes everything from 911 dispatchers to police officers, prosecutors, public defenders. A lot of people, for whatever reason, don't want to go into these professions. And as a result of that, we're living in a world where we have finite resources. And as a result of those finite resources, we have to figure out ways to get the job done. And sometimes this situation we're in can also be a blessing because it has forced us to look at the way we do business and see how we can do it better. One of those areas is the mental health crisis. Police are so often, we ask our police to be mental health counselors, domestic violence counselors, substance abuse counselors. We ask them to have the answer to every single problem in a split second without the benefit of hindsight. And as a result of that, what we as a society have put on the police officers, we have not kept up with giving them the tools in a lot of ways to get the job done. So our prisons are filled with people that have mental health, I'll say mental health issues. And a lot of these individuals are committing crimes, but there's a whole segment of them that are in the throes of, we'll say, a mental health crisis. The police are called. The police go and interact with this individual. The police make it safe. And sometimes there will be some type of interaction where the person may end up in jail, or they're just let back out on the street and they haven't had any treatment whatsoever, nothing. And so as a result of that, and a result of seeing, again, understanding that police, their time is so valuable, we have identified in York, and there's other places that have done this to a certain extent as well, the co-responder model. And so what we have done is we've partnered with our regional healthcare provider, WellSpan. And that has created, and through that, created was what's called the START Clinic, okay? And that is a place where people can go to get immediate mental health assessments done. And so what happens is we have what are called co-responders that are trained mental health professionals that go with the police officer. Well, the police officer makes the situation safe, and then the co-responder comes in and addresses the individual that's having the mental health crisis, which ultimately, and I don't have the specific data on me, but I know that many of these individuals end up getting involuntarily committed. Many of them are voluntarily committed where they commit themselves, and many come back at a given time for an appointment to have these mental health assessments done. When you look at some of the most horrific crimes in our community, from mass shootings to domestic violence cases, and you look at a lot of the people that are perpetrating these crimes, if you walk back in time, in many cases, you will find that that person had a contact with the criminal justice system with some mental health issue, and it was never addressed. And so when you address these mental health issues, you're not only saving resources in the criminal justice system, you're creating an environment where that individual is getting the treatment they need so that they don't go on, hopefully, to commit further crimes. They're not languishing in a prison cell for some unbelievable, like really low-level offense. And that saves money for taxpayers. Since we started these initiatives, we've saved almost $16 million for York County taxpayers through the Opioid Collaborative, through all the work we've done with mental health, and that also includes Stepping Up Initiative and a lot of other mental health initiatives as well. And then you touch on reentry, which is something I'd love to talk about as well. We've been able to decrease crime in York County by 41% since a 10-year high. 30% since I've come into office. Our prison population has dropped by almost half. And that's not by letting people out of prison, that's by not having as many people getting arrested. And again, and that in turn saved around $16 million for taxpayers. And so the mental health crisis there's not only a moral duty to address the mental health crisis, there's also a fiscally responsible and professionally responsible duty to address it as well.
So I have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
Can you talk about how you're campaigning and what are you hearing from voters out on the campaign trail?
So I'm really enjoying this process. I love talking to people. I love hearing their concerns. And I'm hearing a lot of people that are concerned about, well, there's a few different things I'm hearing. So the first thing I hear a lot of with regard to criminal justice system is opioids. Fentanyl, people are very worried about fentanyl. And that's something that obviously we're dealing with right now as well, that every county's dealing with. The entire country's dealing with fentanyl. So you're hearing a lot about that. We're hearing a lot about, believe it or not, again, the mental health crisis. Like people are talking about their concerns about their children and about the world they live in. I hear a lot of people talk about that we live in a negative world. And so you hear things you don't quite expect on the trail. And I hear that from a lot of people. People from all walks of life, from all political spectrums, that they just wish that we had a way to come together and live and somehow find a way to have positive outcomes and it's almost like people are hungry for that. And so that makes me happy because whether it's a good thing or bad, I am the eternal optimist. And I truly believe that we do live in a world where people can come together. They can work on issues like this together as a community. We've done that in York. I mean, when you look at the city of York, the work we've done with group violence, and that's working with police and clergy, with the Black Ministers Association, with the community at large. You then bring in the mental health component, and you also, we said this at the beginning of the interview, well, I said it, is that you have to have accountability, but you also have to have redemption. So we partner with manufacturers in the community so that when people come out of prison, we help get them jobs. And that really does a wonderful thing to decrease crime.
We have just a couple of minutes left. Use that time to tell voters why they should vote for you.
Absolutely. So to start with, the Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer for the state. You absolutely, hands down, need an Attorney General that understands the entire criminal justice system from the bottom all the way to the top. And that's me. I have done everything from the lowest of the low prosecutor, worked my way up all the way to twice elected district attorney. I've addressed the opioid epidemic. I've addressed mental health. At the same time, I have also prosecuted many murderers. I put murderers in prison for life. I have done work prosecuting elder abuse. So you have to be strong on the criminal side of this. But at the same time, it's not mutually exclusive. You can have empathy and do what you can. And that's the type of leadership we need in this community. We need someone who has a track record of bringing people together to achieve the common good. And that's something that I have done. I'm very proud of it. And I think I know that's exactly what we need for the Attorney General in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'm very excited about it. And that's why I'm asking for people's vote.
Well, we've been speaking with Dave Sunday. He is a Republican candidate for Pennsylvania Attorney General. Thank you for joining me.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much. Are the mics off?
Yeah, we're not recording anymore.
Are we like off record, sort of? Like.
Well, the show's over.
I mean, generally, yeah. So what I mean by that is, I have worked very hard to work